Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in.
Hello, sir.
Hey.
Hey, karaoke was really fun. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, yeah, that was fun.
Things good with you otherwise?
Yeah, generally good. My rabbit's just running around somewhere. I just let him into the rest of the house. Yeah, he had been confined to the living room for a little while.
Oh, but now he's got more freedom.
He's hopping around, yeah.
Great.
Got my bunny mug.
Excellent.
How about you?
All's good. Just settling back from post my Australia trip. And yeah, nothing, no major updates. Feeling good. Cool. Well, you wrote some great pieces. I'm excited to get into them as well with a few questions. I wanted to first start with the Europe piece as it relates to, and it could lead into a little bit of sort of on the Ukraine-Russia front. Basically, what I got from your piece is that Vance and Hegseth, basically said, "Hey, Europe, you're on your own now, or it's up to you to lead here," and you basically agreed with that conclusion, even if you sort of the reasons as to why they said that might be disingenuous or might not be fully accurate depending on how you read it. But the conclusion that Europe needs to step up and support Ukraine, you've been saying for a while now, and you also say that it's plausible or that it's feasible. And I'm curious, just for a broader kind of update, even high level, like where is the conflict right now, and what are the potential paths forward?
So it turned out that Ukraine was a lot more capable of sustaining war industry than people thought. Their economy didn't collapse. They were able to do a lot of like underground drone manufacturing, stuff like that. They're making a crap ton of drones actually. And they're making a lot of military material. And they're sort of making a lot of software too. I think exporting software, Ukraine has some of the best, software people in the world. And basically just some really cracked engineers in Ukraine. Ukraine did not economically collapse, and militarily, technology has shifted such that defense is now more powerful than offense. So you can't just send tanks forward in a blitzkrieg, you just lose them all. Combined arms assaults, which is our, very polite name for blitzkrieg, that doesn't really work at this point. Basically, the technology has shifted toward the defense. And so Russia is only able to take small amounts of territory. And also Ukraine has basically destroyed or driven away the Russian fleet. They've really, without a navy, they've beaten the Russian navy. So that's kind of interesting. But Russia keeps grinding forward and taking small amounts of territory on land because Russia is basically throwing huge amounts of manpower into it. Russia has 4 times the population of Ukraine, and they can just do basically human waves. And so they're doing these human waves again and again, and they're grinding forward small amounts of territory. It's very World War I-esque, where they just say like, "Into the breach, lads." Remember, all the stories you've heard of World War I? Well, that's back, and the Russians are doing it, and they have, they've got prisoners and convicts and other sort of like minorities and other sort of expendables. But I think really it's just that life in Russia is not amazing. And so they're able to get lots of people to sort of sign up for the war for economic reasons. And so they've got plenty of guys, and the guys show up. And then they also took like a bunch of North Koreans. Remember that? They like North Koreans showed up and started, grinding forward on the battlefield, and then got beat pretty quick because North Korea hasn't, fought a war in a long time and nobody knows how to fight. And but Russia's taking small amounts of territory, and the Ukrainians are being pushed back because of their inferior population and their smaller population. That's the military situation as of now. U.S. aid to Ukraine is still important, but it's becoming a lot less important than it was. And so I think that one thing that Trump's people may not realize, they all seem to have this idea that if America withdrew military support, Ukraine would collapse tomorrow, and that's not actually true. Ukraine makes a shit ton of drones domestically, and drones are now the chief defensive weapon. The chief defensive weapon that you use on the battlefield. And Europe, can provide a decent amount and does provide a decent amount of stuff to Ukraine. Things like tanks have become less important. There's like a lot basically Ukraine has a lot of like shoulder mounted missiles and drones and then artillery shells are the other thing. You need basically HIMARS rockets and then, other shells for artillery. And so Ukraine is starting to make those itself, but then, Europe makes more of those. So Europe Like Germany makes a lot of those. America had real trouble making those. And we'd made some for Ukraine, but we weren't actually that good at it. So American support for Ukraine is still helpful, but it's less crucial than it was a year or certainly 2 years ago.
Got it. And so, okay, so you want to see Europe help more in that example you just gave about Germany. What are the likely paths forward for this conflict?
It's not entirely clear because, essentially the Trump administration has this idea in their mind that what they're going to do is they're going to carve up Ukraine, that they're going to divide Ukraine. Russia's going to get part of it, and then the rest of it will become sort of an economic protectorate of America, where all its continued independence depends on giving America mineral resources and other such. So basically, that's not likely to actually happen. First of all, so basically they've decided the Europeans, the Germans, the French, all these guys are basically a non-entity, and I think they're putting a lot of their hope in AfD winning in Germany. And the idea that if people are mad enough about immigration in Germany, they'll vote in this party that's kind of Russia sympathetic. And then Germany is the main industrial power in Europe. And they think that if Germany flips to the pro-Russian side, then Ukraine is toast and basically would have to accept a partition of itself into a Russian-controlled part, and then a part that maybe America will de facto control. That's my guess. That's my guess as to what they're thinking. They don't call me up and tell me what they're thinking. But so it's not so easy. First of all, AfD may not win in Germany. People really fear foreign influence, and AfD certainly is pretty pro-Russian. And I think that Americans constantly yelling at Germany has negatively polarized them. And whereas Germany is doing some things that I think are fairly anti-democratic, but they're not going to use that anti-democratic stuff to be on America's side, or be on the side of Trump, right? They're going to use anti-democratic stuff to squelch the right. And Germany's been doing that for decades. They've been doing that since World War II, actually. Nazi ideology and symbols and language and statements have all been banned since World War II. Germany's never had freedom of speech. They, basically, if you say the Holocaust didn't happen, Germany can put you in jail, and occasionally does. And so Germany's never really had free speech. The wrinkle in here is that people are really mad about like the bad behavior of primarily Muslim immigrants, and then burning the Quran has also incurred Germany's sort of anti-free speech antibodies, where they'll put you in jail for burning the Quran or something. I think that's dumb. I think that's a mistake of theirs, but they want social order and peace and blah, blah, blah. And so America forgets that European countries were free and democratic and all this stuff because we told them to be, except France. They really like it. But Germany is free and democratic because we told them to be after World War II. And West Germany, we said that. And then all of Germany after the end of the Cold War, we said, okay, act like us. And they did, because they had to, because we supported them. We don't support them anymore. We're not their ally anymore. It's pretty clear that Trump will not answer like a NATO Article 5 summons or whatever. We won't fight on their side. We're not their enemy. We're not going to invade and attack Germany. But nor are we their ally anymore in any meaningful sense of the word, with Trump in there. And so Germany's going to do their own thing. And what that thing is not entirely clear to me. But the idea that Germany is our satrapy, Germany is our colony, they're a province, whatever, the 51st state, et cetera, that's wrong. Germany's not. They're a smaller country than us, but they act independently of us. And I think Trump and those people are putting a lot of hope in the idea that AfD will win. And if AfD doesn't win, then Trump's plans for Germany are in trouble. Turkey is a country that America doesn't control, and in fact has never controlled. They even denied us their bases for the Iraq war. They're like, no, we're in NATO, but fuck you. We're not going to do that. The Iraq war is stupid. And Turkey's President Erdogan, who himself is not, he's as anti-democratic as Trump and has crushed a lot of opposition locally. He just said he supports Ukraine's full territorial integrity, which means basically no to the American idea of carving up Ukraine and handing some to Russia. Turkey has 80 million people, right? Turkey's population plus Ukraine's population is just about equal to Russia's, actually, almost. And maybe slightly smaller, but then it's basically similar. Turkey, Poland, and Ukraine that's more people than Russia. And Poland is arming itself to the teeth. It's spending, 5% of its GDP on defense, which is a lot. That's about as much as we did during the height of the Reagan buildup, and they may do more. They are certainly, a manufacturing champion. They can make a lot of drones and batteries and missiles and things like that, and they are ramping up production. So, and then Britain has, the Labour government said, and the conservative opposition agreed with the idea that Britain could put boots on the ground in Ukraine. It's not clear what France will do, but Macron has called a EU summit. And so I'd say there's a possibility. You never want to say this too early because Europe has been in a deep, deep slumber since the end of the Cold War. And it was in sort of a half slumber since World War II, but it was especially, Europe has just been completely sleeping since the end of the Cold War. Europe's waking up. Europe has lots of manufacturing capacity. I think Europe has more manufacturing capacity, than the United States, if you take them all together. So we talk about how China has so much more manufacturing capacity than the United States. Well, I think Europe United does as well. And they've got more people than the United States by quite a bit. Especially if you take the EU and then you add Turkey, that's like, it's well over 500 million people. America has got 330 million people. So that's bigger than America, certainly more than 3 times as big as Russia, with more manufacturing capacity than the United States. I think one German company can make more artillery shells than all American companies put together.
Why are they so good at that? Is it just that we're so bad at it because we hollowed it out, or
Yeah, we financialized our economy.
and they did it?
They did less. They have, Europe is sort of, a good rule of thumb is that Europe moved half in the direction of America and remains half the old, value industry and, manufacturing and stuff like that. So what Europe doesn't have is young people. America only has young people because of young Hispanic people. And that's increasingly not going to be true because Hispanic birth rates have crashed. But it is still true today. Like, Hispanic birth rates crashed less than 18 years ago. So we still have a large cohort of Hispanic people to fill out our military with, a flood of young people. That's going to go away in a few years. And America is going to be where Europe is in terms of young people for our military, et cetera. But now who knows, Russia's already there. Like Russia had a small baby boom, and those are the people fueling their military right now, but they're kind of running out of that. So Russia's got demographic problems too. Ukraine certainly is out of people. They're using 40-year-olds on the front lines. And so these are a bunch of old grandpas sitting on their front porch, kind of yelling at each other and throwing fruit at each other from across the porch. None of these have large surplus populations. And the only reason Russia and Ukraine fight, the only reason those countries do fight, I think, Ukraine is under the threat of death. They're going to be, if Ukraine gets absorbed into Russia, they'll all be tortured and repressed. And Russia actually genocided them under the Soviet Union. And so they don't want that again. There's the thing called the Holodomor. Back when we used to call genocides things that had holo at the end. Stalin genocide Ukrainians, killed millions of them. And that just by intentionally starving them to death. And that was really shitty. And so they don't want that. They know that that's coming if they lose. So what Sarah Payne, you've seen Sarah Payne's interviews with Rakesh, right? She calls it being on death ground. Ukraine's on death ground here. And Turkey, Poland, maybe Britain, maybe France, and then who knows about Germany, are willing to support Ukraine, and Finland and a few smaller countries. The idea that these are all just American proxies, these are all just American colonies, and they do nothing, they're useless, they'll all collapse, once we just pull out whatever. That's not entirely false because they have been sleeping for a long time and haven't been using their manufacturing capacity for war, and they've been divided on policy and sort of had their head up their ass with silly ideologies and whatever. But it's half false. It's not entirely true because these guys, Turkey, they fight a lot of wars. They know how to fight. They fight internal rebels, Kurdish rebels. They fight in Syria. They fight in Libya. They fight all out of places. They know how to fight. They make good drones. There's a lot of them, 80 million Turkish people. That's compared to say 140 million Russians and maybe 35 million Ukrainians, I think. And then I think 38 million Polish people. So these are substantial numbers here, even without the countries of Western Europe getting involved and putting all their back into this fight. Ukraine can do a lot. They can hold out, especially because the defense is now favored, right? Ukraine needs people, right? But if Turkey sends their people, that's done. Russia couldn't advance against the Turkish army in Ukraine. And so there's a precedent for this, which is the Crimean War. Do you know about that war?
Is this where Russia took it from Ukraine, or?
No, so at that point, Ukraine was divided between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia. Yeah, there was no Ukraine at that time. In fact, this is really the first time there's been an independent Ukraine ever. And so Ukraine is fighting its independence war right now. And so Russia and Turkey were sort of fighting over Crimea, and Russia was trying to take Crimea from Turkey. Then, the Ottoman Empire, Turkey was kind of weak at that time. And then so Britain and France stepped in and said, all right, we're going to send a bunch of guys to Crimea to stop the Russians, stop the Russian encroachment. And Britain and France had a good amount of population together. They didn't quite match Russia in population, but they came pretty close. And with Turkey, they would be well ahead of it because Turkey had a huge empire at that time too. All together, so they defeated Russia. The triple alliance of Britain, France, and Turkey. I think they also had the Kingdom of Sardinia in there. They beat Russia. And have you ever heard the Charge of the Light Brigade?
No, I never heard it.
Noble 600 is this cavalry group charged artillery into the face of artillery blasts and actually took the Russian artillery. And this was a very bad lesson to learn because the myth of this charging brigade, kind of inspired people to do human wave assaults in World War I and get killed. But you can't actually charge the guns. It was the last case in which people charged the guns and won. So Pickett's charge obviously did not work. That was a few years later.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsors. What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts and you'll get 10 answers. It's a bull market. It's a bear market. Rates will rise or fall. Can someone invent a crystal ball? Until then, over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their business with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. With real-time insights and forecasting, you're peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing the books in days and not weeks, you're spending less time looking backwards and more time on what's next. If I had needed this product, it's what I'd use. Whether your company is earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/102. The guide is free to you at netsuite.com/102. netsuite.com/102. Ever feel like managing your business finances is a full-time job on top of your actual full-time job? Yeah, me too. That is until I started using Found. Found is a business banking platform that lets you effortlessly track expenses, manage invoices, and prepare for taxes. You can even set aside money for different business goals and control spending with different virtual cards. I've saved so much money because Found helps me identify tax write-offs. And I saved so much time that I can now devote to chasing new opportunities and doing the work I enjoy. Oh, and by the way, other small businesses are loving Found too. This Found user said, "Found is going to save me so much headache. It makes everything so much easier. Expenses, income, profits, taxes, invoices even. And Found has 30,000 5-star reviews just like this." Open a Found account for free at found.com/econ102. Found is a financial technology company, not a bank. Banking services are provided by Piermont Bank member FDIC. Don't put this one off. Join thousands of business owners who have streamlined their finances with Found.
Yeah, so that the Crimean War happened and Russia got beat, and that was the first of 3 key Russian defeats that led to the collapse of the old Tsarist Empire. The second being the defeat to Japan, 3 and 4, and then the defeat to Germany in World War I. And so after that, Russia collapsed, the communists came over, and then they sort of revived Russian power with the Soviet Union. But then the old Tsarist Empire took 3 L's in a row and then hung up the gloves. And Putin's empire is much more similar to the Tsarist Empire than it is to the Soviet Union.
How so?
Well, the Soviet Union, first of all, was multi-ethnic. Yes, we all called it Russia, and yes, we knew that the Russians were in some sense in charge. But then a lot of the core talent for the Soviet Union came from Ukraine, came from the Baltic countries, and then a lot of manpower came from Central Asia. Russia doesn't have those people and that talent anymore. Russia is, the Soviet Union had actually more people than America. Russia has less than half as many as America. Russia has 140 million people about, and then America has 330 million people. Like they've got less than half of us. But certainly like the Soviet Union and the Tsarist Empire were both colossuses of size, and modern Russia had shrank a lot. When Putin says that this that the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical catastrophe of, in history or 20th century or whatever, what he means is that basically Russia lost control of all these subject peoples. And Russia has been slowly trying to reestablish control over the subject peoples, and that's what the Ukraine war is about. And that's what the war in Georgia was about. That's what, the Russia maintaining its little enclave in Transnistria was about. And that's what this is about. It's about Putin wants to reestablish a Russian empire. He doesn't have the ideology of the Soviet Union. He's not a communist. He does not have the, aristocratic leanings of the Tsarists, but he wants to make a Russian empire. And he's doing it with much smaller capabilities than Russia used to have. Russia used to have, under the USSR, Russia didn't have efficient manufacturing, but they had a lot. They had a lot of manufacturing. They could make more tanks than we could. Fewer planes and ships, but more tanks.
And how do we know he wants to make an empire?
Well, he says it on TV.
Got it. So he says
Russia is expanding. Like he talks about the glory of the Tsars. We're going to restore that. Historic Russia. I mean, like, what else?
Is he explicit? Is he like, I want to take over Poland? I want to take over.
He doesn't say Poland, no. He's not explicit about Poland, although he talks about Poland a lot. He talks about we need revenge over Poland, blah, 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 blah. He talks about territories historically belonging to Russia. He talks about that. What else would, in your mind, what else would be necessary to think like, oh, that's an imperialist? Right?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think so I don't follow it closely. So I don't know if he's saying, hey, these are the places that this is what sort of the end game looks like. We own these territories, or if he's sort of hinting at saying, hey, we need to get back to former glory. And like, is it explicit or is it implicit? And not to say implicit is any less of a threat or something, but I'm just curious why there's a wing of people who believe that he's not it's sort of the Mearsheimer cohort. It's like, oh, we provoked him. He's not, Hitler, et cetera.
Well, okay. I mean, I do not think Putin is like Hitler. I think Putin is in some sense like Hitler in the sense that he's a revanchist. He wants to avenge historical humiliations and avenge the loss of the Cold War. So I think that in that sense, he's like Hitler, but he doesn't have this idea of a war of the internal war against the Jews, war to purify the Russian state. His concept of what the ideal society is doesn't look like Hitler, and he's not going to, I don't think he believes that he could conquer the world. Maybe if he could, he would, but he can't. I think that he thinks that he just wants to increase Russian power. And so I think what people need to realize is that used to be everybody. There used to be no countries in the world that weren't like that. There were a few isolationist countries who were like, we'll just defend our borders and fuck off, so isolationist Japan, isolationist China for a little while. But there were like some countries that were isolationist in that sense. And, America always had like an anti-imperialist wing. Like people were yelling about the fact that we took over the Philippines and we took over, part of Mexico and made it American territory, and 5440 or fight, manifest destiny, all this. People yelled about that and were complained about it. But we were imperialists too at that time. And like everyone just thought, I want my country to have more territory. That's what I want. Because that was how you made money in the past. You taxed land and farming. And then like, that was also, the more people you could have, you had borders, the farther your borders away from your capital, the safer you are. Right. And so Sarah Payne talks about this a lot. And so Russia was expansionist, but so was everybody else. Like you take Louis XIV in, La France, and he pushed France's borders up into the Low Countries, Belgium and whatever. He pushed France's borders, east into what's today Germany. He was expansionist, and he was stopped. His expansionism was halted by European coalitions. And so this used to be the norm in Europe. European leaders they'd try to grab bits of territory, and then everyone else would gang up and try to stop them. Like that is historic Europe. That's called the balance of power. That's much more than in Asia. Right, in Asia, you have had expansionism and conquest at times, but you didn't have concerts of powers who would gang up on whoever was trying to take territory this week. But in Europe, you had that, right? When France tried to conquer bits of territory and expand in the 1700s, Britain organized coalitions to stop them, and they did. And the Duke of Wellington. Have you heard of the Duke of Wellington?
I've heard the name, but I don't know why it's influential.
Those rubber boots.
Yep.
He went and he fought on the continent, and he defeated some armies of Louis XIV. Ultimately, Louis XIV was a bit like Putin in that he grabbed small bits of territory at the fringes of his empire in small wars of expansion. This gave him the confidence to do a large war of expansion in the War of the Spanish Succession, in which he basically is like, okay, Spain, we'll take that shit. Look, it's right there. It's this little peninsula. We can, used to be a powerful country. We'll take Spain. It has fewer people than France. We beat them in the 30 Years' War. They're weak. We will put our guy on their throne. So I'm being like dime store, low rent Sarah Payne right now with my little geopolitical simplifications, but we should really get her instead of just me. But read Wikipedia or just talk to AI. Yeah, I'll tell you stuff. And then he bit off more than he could chew. A big alliance happened against him, and then everybody fought him, and it looked like France was about to actually fall, and he was about to like completely just catastrophically lose and die. And then he fought back. He reorganized his economy, reorganized his society to fight back, got some actually competent people in there. And then the War of the Spanish Succession ended in a draw. And I think that's the closest comparator to Putin. He also said, the state is me. He was an absolute monarch, like the king isn't just first among equals, he's a dictator. King is a dictator, basically. France's sort of royalist regime depended on continued expansion. Got to fight for the glory of the king. Without that, everybody was sort of restless and would maybe revolt, and they did. It's called the French Revolution, and it sucked for those guys. They got their head chopped off, and France underwent this whole thing, and then they got this dictator to come in and try to like restore French glory, and he got his ass kicked because balancing coalitions formed in Europe. And so like Putin is the biggest dog in Europe, but he's not the only dog, and he's not bigger than everybody else. He's smaller than everybody else combined by a lot.
We'll continue our interview in a moment after a word from our sponsor. Let's talk about supply and demand. The supply, your personal data, which is being bought and sold every day entirely without your knowledge. The demand, thousands of data brokers who are making a fortune trading your private information. This isn't just a rant about spam in your inbox. Data breaches enable identity theft and loss of control over your digital data. But what if you could opt out of this whole system? That's exactly what Incogni does. They handle everything automatically, finding the data brokers who have your information, sending removal requests, and dealing with any pushback. No phone calls, no emails, no hassle on your end. What makes this service really powerful is that it never stops working. Incogni continuously monitors your data, showing up in new places, and automatically sends removal requests. Because in today's world, your personal information keeps getting repackaged and resold unless you actively stop it. They'll even handle any pushback from data brokers who don't want to delete your data. Want to extend that peace of mind to your loved ones? Incogni's Family and Friends plan lets you protect up to 4 additional people under one subscription. Take control of your digital privacy today. Visit incogni.com/econ102 and try it risk-free with their 30-day money-back guarantee. Take your personal data back with Incogni. Use code econ102 at the link below and get 60% off an annual plan. Again, that's incogni.com/econ102. Every time I hop on the 101 freeway in SF, I look up at the various tech billboards and think, damn, turpentine should definitely be up there. And I bet I'm not alone. In a world of endless scrolling and ad blockers, sometimes the most powerful way to reach people is in the real world. That's where AdQuick comes in. The easiest way to book out-of-home ads, like billboards, vehicle wraps, and airport displays. The same way you would order an Uber. Started by Instacart alums, AdQuick was born from their own personal struggles to book and measure ad success. AdQuick's audience targeting, campaign management, and analytics bring the precision and efficiency of digital to the real world. Ready to get your brand the attention it deserves? Visit adquick.com today to start reaching your customers in the real world. Again, that's adquick.com.
Russia's manufacturing capacity is, if China came in and fought Europe, then Europe would be defeated. If China sent its army and its full manufacturing capacity into Europe to like conquer Germany and France and all those guys, they wouldn't necessarily be defeated because, well, if China sent its people, but China won't send its people. China will not send like its army into Europe to like conquer France, conquer Germany. It's not going to send that. if China threw its manufacturing capacity, Europe would then have to really like rapidly reindustrialize for war and become like, spend 20% of GDP on the military. That's war level, major war level. They'd spend 20% of GDP on the military. They build like a shit ass ton of drones, and they kill every Russian. They kill every Russian soldier. And then Russia, even with Chinese support, the Russian soldiers, they're like taking heavy casualties against Ukraine, which is tiny compared to them. They would against Europe, they would just get their ass kicked if Europe actually fought.
And why haven't they fought to date? What have they been scared of, I guess?
Well, they have no young people. Russia doesn't either. Europe can fight. They'll be sending 40-year-olds to the front too, just like Russia and just like Ukraine, right? It's old man war. There's actually a science fiction novel called Old Man's War by John Scalzi, but it's basically like that in Europe. It's like it's the old people's war, but they can fight. Old people can fight. You and I could go to the front and fight if we had to. Our backs would hurt, and we'd poop out a little bit, and we'd get killed by drones, but we'd do it if we had to. And so then, but yeah, so Europe could defend itself. It would just have to get very serious. Russia has always sort of banked on being able to either control Europe or at least keep it off balance and distracted by supporting parties. So they used to support left-wing parties. The Soviet Union would always support these communist parties throughout Europe. They all took their marching orders from like Soviet spies, right? Now Russia is basically flipped, and now they support right-wing parties, support, AfD in Germany. They hope that AfD's popularity will, AfD winning would be a huge coup for them. But then even if AfD doesn't win, it can keep Germany off balance, and force the government of Germany to sort of crack down on AfD by doing things that make people mad, like cracking down on free speech, things like that. So this is part of Russia's plan to dominate Europe without fighting. And essentially America is now helping them with that plan. Trump supports AfD for ideological reasons, but also because Trump hopes that by sacrificing as much as possible of East Europe as a Mearsheimer Mearsheimeran sphere of influence by saying, okay, Russia, you can have a bit of empire if you be on our side against China, because Trump administration has woke up and realized that China will kick our ass. We need more allies. And Europe was never going to ally with us against China. They're too parochial. They're too weak. They were never going to be on our side against China. So we're like, okay, maybe we can get the Russians to be on our side against China.
Is that possible?
No.
But why not?
Because China now, first of all, China now provides all of, Russia's manufacturing stuff, manufactured goods and whatever.
So we're not going to be able to win over Russia. China's already doing too much.
Yeah. China's already done too much. And then China could just take Russia's Far East like that. America, like Europe doesn't threaten Russia nearly as much as China threatens Russia. Europe threatens Russia's regional expansion plans, sure, but they don't threaten Russia's territorial integrity of actual Russia and its survival as a state like China does. China can just be like, oh, the Russian Far East, it's now the Chinese Far North. And they could do that tomorrow. Like they've got roads, infrastructure built all the way up, all the way running into that territory. They've got, look at the population asymmetry between China and Russia. Russia's got 140 million people. China's got 1.4 billion. That's 10 times as much. That is America versus Canada. Russia is China's Canada, and so China can just ditch slap Russia like that. And it's not like we're going to send expeditionary forces. We're not going to launch World War III with China to stop. Like if China, if Russia turned against China because they wanted to like help Trump, something like that. And China's like, oh, you're against us now? I thought we were best friends yesterday.
Well, why would we defend Taiwan but not Russia?
Because we couldn't defend Russia. Taiwan's an island, man. You defend it with Navy. We've got missiles. We've got planes. We don't have boots on the ground. China has 10 times the population of Russia. They've got 4 times the population of America. Right? And so, yeah, like we couldn't defend Russia. We do not have the capability to defend Russia except by launching nukes at China. We could nuke China. That's it. We did threaten to do that in 1969. We threatened to nuke Russia if they attacked China. We could threaten to nuke China if they attacked Russia. We could do that, but Russia has its own nukes. They can already nuke China just as well as we can. They have as many nukes as we do. We could add our nukes to the nuke pile. But like we can do, lend-lease. We could give manufactured goods to Russia. We could make stuff for Russia, but we had trouble making stuff just for Ukraine against Russia. This amount of stuff that we'd need to make for Russia against China, we do not have the capability to make anywhere near that, not even close, not even in the ballpark. Like defending Taiwan is a matter of ships and planes and missiles. We've got some of those, although we need to manufacture a lot more. Also, defending Taiwan, we've got Japan on our side. We might have India on our side. We've got, Australia, South Korea, these countries on our side. Defending Russia, who do we have on our side? Europe?
Hopefully Europe.
No one's going to fucking stand up for Russia. Russia knows China can just like whip it like that and will. Russia is a Chinese proxy state now. We're trying to peel off a state that can't be peeled off.
Got it. And so just to circle back, because basically what you're saying, what I'm hearing from you is US is trying to get AFD, or Trump is trying to get AFD elected. If AFD is elected, that means it's likely, or it's possible, or more likely, that Ukraine will get partitioned off to Russia. If AFD is not elected, then there'll be kind of like a stalemate indefinitely until one side is just sort of gives up.
So I actually don't know that. So I don't know that Ukraine's defense depends much on AFD getting elected. I think obviously Russia wants AFD to get elected, and Trump thinks that AFD getting elected would help cement a US-Russia de facto alliance, which is bonkers. But I don't think I think nobody really thinks Germany is going to go hard in terms of defending Ukraine. I think in terms of the coalition of the willing to defend Ukraine is going to look more like Britain, Turkey, Poland, Finland, and maybe France. But that would work. Britain, Turkey, Poland, Finland, and maybe and France. If you could get that together, Germany or no Germany, that would be sufficient to defend Ukraine. That's your Crimean alliance right there. That's your triple alliance.
So are the options either that Ukraine gets partitioned off or that Russia just backs off from sort of pre-war borders? Those are the options.
Everyone at this point thinks the war is going to end. The question is, where does the war end? What does that look like? What territory does Russia get to keep? What diplomatic guarantees does Ukraine make? Just today, America and Russia, speaking without Ukraine, demanded elections in Ukraine because they think we can get a pro-Russian guy in there, and then all of Ukraine goes back to being Russia's sphere of influence. They're wrong about that. They can't. Ukrainians fucking hate Russia. Zelensky could just trip on a landmine and die tomorrow, and then Ukrainians would elect the most rabidly anti-Russian person they can find. Probably like Zaluzhny, the guy that Zelensky fired, but he's like even more rabidly anti-Russian than Zelensky. So they're not, the idea that Ukraine is going to elect a Russian puppet, or that Ukrainian elections could be rigged to elect a Russian puppet. Like, Russians hope that that's true, but they know that's not true. It was not true with Yanukovych. It was not, they in the early days of the war, Russia said, "Oh, we'll bring back Yanukovych. We'll take Kyiv, and we'll bring back our puppet. We'll install him in there, and then we'll rule Ukraine. It's part of our sphere of influence." No, Ukrainians they'll die before they go back to Russia. They're because they know that if they elected a pro-Russian guy and then Russian troops basically occupy all of Ukraine, whatever, then they're just going to get genocided and raped and mass raped, all those things. Russians do that. The Russians do all the bad things you've heard about armies doing. Other armies don't necessarily. We didn't necessarily do that in Iraq. We actually behaved ourselves pretty well. But Russians, they take you over, your wife's getting raped.
So tragic, crazy.
That's it. Your daughter's meat for the Russian army dick. And so that's that's what happens to you. And then they'll ask around, did this guy, how much did this guy support the Ukrainian government during the war? How much did he support the war effort? And if you supported it more than a certain amount, you're off to the camps. They just shoot you like a dog in back or whatever. They do this. They disappear you in the middle of the night. What happens. Right. And then probably Russia would try to cull Ukraine's population to some degree. There'd be, probably some genocides, maybe not they're not going to try to exterminate Ukraine, but they'll mass killing certainly to cull Ukraine. They'll do all that shit. And everyone knows it too. This isn't me spinning a theory. This is what everyone in Ukraine will just tell you because they've been there before.
And so why are we confident that the war is going to end if we're not sure? Why isn't it just a stalemate? And definitely, and two, what's going to determine what, or who's going to determine sort of what is the sort of final calculations? Is it some other country besides Ukraine and Russia that is the determinant? How's this going to play out?
Say that one more time. What you mean, is the war going to end? Well, yeah, I think that when you look at industrialized, like conventional wars like this, you look at how long they last, right? You do not see a high intensity war like this last beyond 4, maybe 5 years. Like you look at the Korean War, it was 4 years, right? You look at World War One, it was 4 years. You look at World War Two, you had the initial phase where, Germany is fighting like Britain and France, but then you had the later phase where they're fighting the Soviet Union. The phase against the Soviet Union lasted 4 years. You do not see countries fight much beyond 4 years. We are right at 3 years on the Ukraine war. And everybody says Russia could sustain this for another year. So we might see another year of war while they wrangle and wrangle and wrangle, just like we might see like one more year of war. But the point is that Russia's inflation's rising again. They're starting to see significant losses to their civilian economy, and starting to see significant population kind of pressures. Like they don't have enough guys to fight. Like it's not as bad as Ukraine, but they're starting to like run out of like easy guys to fight.
Right. And
I don't think this war is going to last much longer than one more year, if that.
and what's going to determine kind of how it plays out, like what the end solution is?
Well, it'll be a negotiated settlement. Because territory is shifted to the defense, or sorry, technology is shifted to the defense. Ukraine's not going to get back the territories it took from Russia. The reason is that it cannot. It cannot. Hanging on to the idea of those territories is something you want. Like Crimea is Ukraine. All these territories of Ukraine. That's actually just a rallying cry to like resist further Russian encroachment. So those territories, Ukraine isn't getting them back, but who will defend Ukraine? Will there be British boots on the ground? Will there be Turkish or Polish boots on the ground? Things like that. Poland really doesn't want to. They're scared to do that. Poland's scared that if they do that, then their people will get killed, and then Putin will just take over them. In turn, they'll run out of guys because Poland does a population crunch too. But will there be? But the leaders of Britain have talked about putting British boots on the ground. Turkey today said he supports Erdogan said he supports full territorial integrity of Ukraine. So they've thrown their hat in the ring. So you can see those, and then France. Who knows what France will do? France is always looking for like a possible way to like regain some of the power and influence it once had. So we'll see. And this certainly Napoleon III, who participated in the Crimean War, the Triple Alliance, certainly he thought that getting involved in this war in coalition with Britain and Turkey would be a way to partially restore France's glory. So we could see Macron try to do that kind of thing. Nobody knows what's going to be done here. And then there's all these backroom things where like, Elon and Putin and both these guys will try to like interfere in German elections as best they can to like get AfD elected, right? They'll give lots of money and influence and like, covert bird to her. And they'll do all that shit to try to get a pro-Russian government elected throughout Europe. Whether that works, I don't know. But then, so they'll try that. And then it's not clear who would put boots on the ground, because remember, these are a bunch of like old men fighting on the porch. It's not clear how bad the Russian economy really is, how worried Putin really is about that. So whether Putin will accept a rapid end to the war if Russia's economy looks really bad. Now, I mean, Putin knows that Russia's economy is going to go, going to get bad in the years to come because Russia's oil infrastructure is wearing out. That's one problem. So China doesn't actually have the technology to restore Russia's oil infrastructure. Germany does. America may. We may sell Russia like the specialized drill bits and drilling equipment that they need to get oil out of the sort of north of Siberia part. So that's a possibility. We could get Halliburton and whoever to like sell them that stuff, I think. But then Russia's, if things go on as they are now, Russia's economy will be hurt. And so, yeah. And so I think that basically there'll be a whole lot of behind the scenes and non-behind the scenes in front of the scenes sort of jockeying for, nobody knows what a new European security arrangement will look like. And it depends a lot on whether the Europeans can resist internal subversion, which we are now facilitating, and whether they can resist sort of like popular inertia, people who still think that like Europe is a garden of peace. Like that's done. But whether people in Europe actually realize that is another question. Like it's over, but whether they realize it's over is it's not clear. The balance of power in Europe is going to return. The balance of power in Europe during the Cold War looked like America versus the Soviet Union. And the balance of power in the post-Cold War looked like just America. It was just America. But that's not going to be true anymore. Europe is not the world-striding colossus of empire that it once was. Like, Germany and France and Britain are much diminished from what they were at that time. Back in the 19th century and early 20th century, they are massively diminished. But that does not. They are not America's 51st state. They are independent countries. They will not. They have more people than us. They have more manufacturing than us. They are. They have less technology than us in many areas. But then, if you wanted a way, something that would push Europe to deregulate its software industry and to build nuclear power plants and to do all this other stuff, this is it. I'm hoping the Europeans will use this as an excuse to get serious about everything that they've been deeply unserious about. I think that European leaders, a few have thought as far as, many have thought as far as I have, actually. A few have thought farther. But the European people and a number of European leaders haven't even thought this far. They still think that they can morally shame America into going back to being what it was in the post-Cold War period, but you cannot. It's not happening. And it's not happening because America, Americans who want to be internationalists, want to focus on Asia, not Europe or the Middle East. Whereas Americans who want to be isolationists don't want to focus on Europe or anywhere or Asia either. So J.D. Vance is probably in that camp. He probably wants to withdraw from the whole world and sort of America rules the Western Hemisphere and ignore, leave the Eurasia to the Eurasians, and then America rules the Western Hemisphere. And this is the dream of Charles Lindbergh and the isolationists in the 1930s, who's argued against, getting involved in World War II. And so it's really a return to that ideology. And so, yeah, so America is not the protector it once was, but Europe is not toothless. Europe is not ineffectual. They just sort of pretend to be.
Let's get to the second part of your piece in the last 10 minutes or so, which is this idea of hey, Europe's got to improve their economy. What are some of the recommendations that you'd make there?
Right. So first of all, Europe really has to deregulate the software industry. Europe has used software regulation as a tool to try to control America. They use things like GDPR to restrict domestic market access as a lever over America. That won't fly anymore.
So that America does what?
Just deregulate the shit out of it. They need AI. Autonomous weapons are going to be really important. AI for factory automation is going to be really important, especially when you have such an aging population, don't have any people to run your factories. You need factory automation. You need a great software industry. Europe has tons of great software engineers. Tons. East Europe is has more software engineers, great software engineers per capita than California. That's the California of Europe. They can get all the software engineers they need. They have tons of them, and they're pretty cracked in terms of talent. However, they have massive regulations. So they need to deregulate software. They need to build all kinds of energy, just open permitting for any kind of energy you want to build. Nuclear, wind, solar, build it. They will need some nuclear because they are in a climate without as much sun. So northern places like Britain will need some nuclear. Nuclear is expensive, but you know how to do it, and it's reliable. And Russia will, of course, try to push green parties in Europe. They try to push the far right. They'll also try to push the left to stop nuclear power, to stop rearmament. So Russia will try to do a pincer movement where they try to, just like they support tankies on Twitter as well as Nazis, right? They'll try to do that to Europe, and they'll try to get the green parties to block nuclear. And in Germany, they'll probably succeed at that because Germany is dumb. But then Germany was never not dumb, by the way. The world wars were dumb. Germany does not have an institutional culture of standing up for itself and protecting its own interests like France and Britain do. They never did. They lurched between one dumb big idea and the next dumb big idea. Germany's dumb. Institutionally dumb. German people are perfectly smart. Germany is a very new country. It only existed since the 1870s. And then had before that it was this tiny little rabble of princedoms and little fiefdoms, and it was divided for forever basically. And so then Germany is a united, purposeful thing. We think it was so united and purposeful because we think of World War II, but even then they were united and purposeful and dumb, and they did dumb things. But Britain and France are not dumb. But Britain needs to build nuclear power. The whole continent needs to build nuclear power, but nuclear will not be the biggest part of the power mix. They need to build solar and wind power wherever they can. They need to basically do that, and they need to get diplomatic relations with countries that can supply them with fossil fuels, and they're going to need to go less hard against climate change. So, oops. Sorry, climate change. Anyway, so that's why Russia will really strongly push green ideology in Europe, as well as sort of like nativist, isolationist ideology. But yeah, so that's that. And so deregulate the software industry, build energy. Oh, and then the third thing is remove all the internal trade barriers. So just like, Canadian provinces have internal trade barriers with each other, which is really dumb. European countries have internal trade barriers. So Mario Draghi has been just really hammering this point. They need to increase their effective market size by basically allowing any European country to sell anything anywhere in Europe frictionlessly. So those are the three big economic reform ideas for Europe that they need to do like tomorrow. After that, maybe we can talk about stuff like industrial policy for remilitarization, like taking some manufacturing back from China, blah, blah, blah. That's later. Deregulate the software industry, build all the energy you can, and then remove all the internal trade barriers. That's step one.
You said they went half America, but not full America. Why didn't they go the full America strategy? Is because they didn't have the luxury of doing it? Because it led to a lot of growth for America, and growth has kind of stagnated in Europe. Or
Europe had a long culture from the era of war. Europe had a long culture of governments being nationalistic and supporting domestic manufacturing for military purposes. That institutional culture and the ties between companies and the government that fostered allowed corporatism to resist neoliberal reforms and financialization more than America was able to resist, although less than, say, China was able to resist. So Europe did lots of neoliberal reforms, but at the end of the day, they still had a bank-centric financial system, which we did not. We went, like in America, banks don't finance manufacturing or industry or whatever. It's bond markets, right? You sell bonds or venture capital, right? But then like Tesla will just borrow money in the market, not from a bank. I mean, banks may lend them money, but it's not enough to keep them going. But in Germany, you borrow from banks. That's what you do. France, you borrow from banks. And so they didn't go toward the full bond marketization of manufacturing and things like that. They had a lot more rules about what private equity was allowed to like take over an asset strip than we did. And they didn't have the tax incentives that we had for private equity to sort of do corporate rating in the 80s. They maintained more industrial policies. So Airbus, they just said, we're going to make aircraft, goddammit. We're going to have an aircraft, much more support than America gave Boeing. And so Airbus is the best aircraft company in the world now. I mean, you've seen what happens to Boeing, right? Like Airbus is the best. I mean, other than, like SpaceX making rockets, like SpaceX has never tried to make like a plane. Maybe they could. But yeah, Airbus is the best. And then supporting the car industry, things like that, supporting mass employment, because also Europe was under pressure from communism during the Cold War. They were like, if we don't maintain full employment and give everybody a job, the commies will win elections. The Soviet Union will dominate us because we'll be politically unpopular. So we can't just like fire everybody like they did in the 80s. So in the 80s, when America is just like, Rust Belt, we're going to fire everybody. Go get a job, being a real estate huckster or whatever. And, and that's what Americans did. But then Europe is like, no, because we'll get conquered by the communists if we do that. So we're going to make sure people like have all these industrial jobs and like have a bunch of jobs. So Europe protected their Rust Belt more than we did because of the threat of communism and the institutional legacy of military industrial cooperation.
Makes sense. Cool. Well, we're at time. Sorry, I have to cut a bit early. It's a great overview of your piece and kind of a deeper dive into what's happening on the Ukraine-Russia front, and as well as advice for Europeans' economy. So, no, this is a great discussion. And as always, until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.